All right, I'm Mark Zeren. I work at Broadcom, and I'm here to talk with Tony about automating supply chain security with Bazel.
Right, I'm Tony Aiuto, and I'm now with Datadog, ex-Google team, but let's give it to Mark first to start.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about a couple of things. I have a brief agenda here.
We lost our video.
As I
Go
said,
forward.
we'll be done in a few minutes.
Clicker forward.
Okay.
That's it.
First, we're going to talk a little bit about why we're here. Then we'll talk a little bit, whoops. Okay, fine. We'll skip the agenda. We'll go straight to why. So we're here because our governments, our businesses, our other institutions, they all depend on very complex, deep software stacks today. And we can use software bills of materials, or SBOMs, as one tool to help manage that complexity. An SBOM is a document that describes the provenance and the composition of software. We can read an SBOM to get an idea of the composition of the software that we're running. It might tell us about the vulnerabilities we're exposed to, the different versions of things that we're running. But reading an SBOM is not necessarily the most important part of the process. The act of complying with the requirement to create an SBOM is actually maybe the more important part of the process, because this ensures that our supply chain is more securable. Just the act of being able to produce a reliable and precise SBOM is really, in some sense, the higher level goal of the process. So we can think of an SBOM as describing two different categories of information. On the right-hand side, we have composition. And you can think of composition as almost a closed problem. If you take the composition of an artifact, you could look at each individual byte in the artifact. And the goal of describing the composition is to describe which first-level inputs to the build influence the value of that byte. And then on the left, we can talk about provenance. So provenance might start with the first-level inputs to a build, but it actually goes much deeper. And the set of information that you can include in provenance is essentially unlimited. You would start, of course, with the composition of all of your inputs. But you might also care about where that artifact was built, like which country it was built in, which data center it was built in, which machine it was built in, which manufacturer made the chip that ran the network card on the machine that it was built in, which fab produced the chip, who was in the fab at that time, who had the key to the cage, this kind of thing. So really the set of information that we will ultimately be talking about in provenance is sort of unbounded. What we're talking about is mostly the bounded set. When we talk about SBOMs today, we're usually talking about this bounded set on the right-hand side. But ultimately, this set of information is going to refer to the precedent SBOMs as well. So traditionally, or currently, in many other systems, there's two basic tools that folks use to build SBOMs. And on the left, I call these observers. And what an observer does is it's something that looks at the inputs to the build. This might look at lock files. It might look at a Maven repository. It might look at, in some more sophisticated setups, it might have a network proxy that looks at all the network traffic that the build uses to gather its inputs. In other scenarios, it might actually interpose on the file system and keep track of all the files that were accessed by the build. But one of the issues with observers is that they can tend to over-report because they see all of the inputs. They can over-report composition. They see all the inputs to the build, so they might see a compiler, they might see the build system itself, but those inputs might not necessarily be something that actually determines the composition of the artifact. And I've represented this in this picture by having a tool on the top and the tool doesn't appear in the artifact. Another class of SBOM tools that exists currently in the industry is something that it does software composition analysis, so this deconstructs the artifact and looks at what's in the artifact. But this category of tool may miss something that's optimized to the point of unrecognizability. So both of these tools, while they work with pretty much any build system or can be made to work with many different build systems, they have these drawbacks. Where we're going with Bazel is taking advantage of the idea that the build graph inside the build system can help make this SBOM determination more precise. So the build graph knows that a tool is a tool. A build graph knows about even the optimized components of an output artifact. So Bazel has a lot of potential here, which is mentioned in almost every talk. It has the hermetic, it optimizes for hermeticity. It has a fine-grained build graph. We have aspects that can reflect over that build graph. It's polyglot and extensible, so we can have one set of tooling that manages very complex software. And again, it scales to very complex software. And it has significant industry adoption, so it's worth investing in these tools because they will help many companies and many customers produce these kinds of artifacts. So given that, you'd think that it would sort of be easy to do this in Bazel. And unfortunately, the answer is not yet. And that's really why we're here, is to talk about how we make it easier to make this just work in Bazel. I got into this in some sense like almost 15 years ago when I was working with one of our early observers and implementing licensing. And I had to be the person that sort of hand tooled a licensing declaration based on, and had to correlate that data with what one of our early observers was seeing. And at that point, I knew there had to be a better system. And then in 2018, when we started porting to Bazel, that's how I found Tony, who was at that time working on rules license. And I just want to point out, we're wearing our matching 2018 BazelCon shirts, just because.
Exactly. All right. Shall we? I'll take the clicker. So I'll tell you a little about the past. Like Mark, my journey started through licensing. I was shipping a desktop application, and I wanted to know that we were compliant with the either GPL or LGPL licenses of third-party code we were using. And the best solution at the time was to use Bazel CQuery, find all the code in particular directories, and then match it with some shell scripts to grab license files and grep things out and do a hand audit, and it's just not acceptable. And around the same time, the early 2018, I moved into the Bazel team and had the then to build what was applicable licenses into Bazel at the time. Now it's called package metadata. And we built an internal system for doing license compliance within Google at that time. It was also around the time of the Bazel 1.0 release. And Blaze in Google contains some old legacy code. For dealing with this, it was the licenses and distribs package level functions. They did nothing useful. We wanted to cut them, not ever release them in Bazel 1. So at the time, we threw rules license over the wall to the open source community in sort of a rush job. And it did the right thing. And around 2022, when the executive order EO 14028 from the US government came out to provide SBOMs with our services, we were able to pivot all the licensing code to produce SBOMs for Google in time for their June deadline. But rules license wasn't a great base. It had too many specific things at the very low level, which were about licensing rather than the whole supply chain. We had to grab copyright notices and push them into the built artifacts. Sometimes you had to put licenses in. We needed the capability to say, well, we use these licenses and our lawyers think they have these conditions, so every company was expected to vendor the stuff in and make the special rules for their company about how they wanted to be compliant. So building on what we knew worked and what we didn't work, we decided to burn it down and start rules supply chain. And for the last year roughly, a group of us have been meeting on a weekly basis to replace the old with the new. You'll notice the only person here who works for Google is Florian. The rest of us represent at least 5 different companies. I'm trying to treat this like a microphone. It doesn't help. So Datadog, we've got EngFlow, we have Broadcom, Simon at Apple, and we hope your company will contribute too. In our present state, we have started up rules supply chain. You'll notice that we changed the URL. We've moved from Bazel build to Bazel contrib to reflect the reality that most of this is driven by industry needs of a group of companies rather than one company's. We've got the capability to replace everything that was done with the rules license. We've, at this time, corrected one of the fundamental flaws of the old thing, which was distributing everything at once as one module. Now we've separated the module for declaring attributes about a package from all the tools. We intend to rev the tools a lot, but we don't want to rev the attributes until we have to, and we'll always do it in a bit backwards compatible way. So I don't want to pound the world with renovate bot things. We've also built a compatibility layer to ease the transition from the legacy rules license things to supply chain tools. So let's see what that looks like. If you wanted to use supply chain tools to build an SBOM for an existing artifact today, you'd have to bring it in through your module.bazel file. You'll notice the version number is 0.0.1, so it's very much your mileage may vary code right now. And our tooling depends on Go, so you'll have to bring in Go at a version you like. And in your build file, sorry. Did I cut off? I'm still there. In your build file, let's say server is your application. We wrap it with an SBOM rule to create an intermediate representation of everything we've gathered. And then to that, have an SPDX rule to generate the final SBOM. You know, there's an industry schism between Cyclone DX format and SPDX format, and neither will win because they each have their uses and advocates. So we just support both. And these two rules on top of Selenium, we picked Selenium as a good demo because it's got lots of dependencies and lots of different languages. So it produces a file like that. And I won't go into the details of the fields because you don't care. But we want to declare this as our forward boundary. Rule supply chain stops at producing the SBOMs because we don't want to have the feature creep of trying to be a vulnerability package manager. There are existing products that will happily ingest your SBOMs and tell you what you have to fix. So that's its own industry. Where we want to do our research is deeper into what Mark talked about, where we want to know how the build happened and get down over the years more and more details about what went into it. As far as the implementation, there are only 2 things at the bottom. There's package metadata rules and package attribute rules. The attribute rules, all they are is their implementation has to return a package attribute info provider, which says, hey, I've got my data, I've written it to a file here. We can be as flexible as we want. Package metadata is a bag of attributes and a PURL, a P-U-R-L, and little more than that. Our tools gather that, write it out to the intermediate format, and then we can do what we want with it. In your code, to declare package metadata, you bring in one of these rules. It's fairly straightforward. The attributes list points only to license right now because we have not built out a lot of attributes. We are doing this slowly as we find proven need for things. So we don't want to, rules package, we threw in a grab bag of stuff fast without thinking it through. We're thinking it through this time. The Perl line, PRL, is interesting. We're using that as the package identifier. Perl is its own large specification. We have a little macro here that builds a correct Perl based on the BCR module name and the module version. The Perl slide is next. So while we're here, we've got a plea for rules authors. If you are publishing code, plain vanilla stuff that does something, please switch to the new annotations as quickly as possible. It's not that much. You saw on the last slide, it's a few lines of additions. If you're a package manager rule, so your rules JS or Go or JVM external, and you're pulling in things from other packages, you're already generating build files somewhere. Please do an update to throw in the package metadata rules in those build files you generate. And we'll come back for a second on implementation about Perls and PRLs. Thanks to Fabian for landing the PR that added Bazel to the known schemas. So these are examples of Perls that define packages in the BCR. And I won't go into the options and syntax. You can read the specification there. Finally, we've got a migration path out of rules license. If you've built tooling based on the old stuff and you are ready to migrate to supply chain tools, you'll throw something like this in the top of your module.bazel file, and it turns all the existing packages that you depend on that may be using rules license transparently into the new scheme. So you can just do a clean cutover in your tooling, and the world will eventually migrate to the new thing. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Mark to talk about our future work.
Okay. So as Tony talked about, I guess topping the list of future work is if you build a Bazel mod extension that wraps an external package manager, this is really important because this exposes those first level inputs to this tooling. As a group, we have already landed 2 of these. Actually, these are Yannick's pull requests against rules JVM external and Bazel Gazelle for Golang. We've kind of poked at the rules JS thing, but it's not working. So if you know how to help, that'd be great. And obviously, all the other external package managers that you might be using, and you may need to do this for internal package managers if you have those as well. These pull requests are not particularly complicated, but they're more than I can put on a slide. But I just wanted to show you, typically in such a module extension, you're going to stamp out a build file somewhere. You'll have a template for that. And more or less, this is the kind of thing they'll be adding. You'll be adding a package metadata rule into that build file template. It will have the Perl for the package manager. In this case, Java coordinates are part of the Perl, and that's essentially the kernel of this kind of change. It's not complicated. We should be able to roll this out throughout the Bazel ecosystem fairly quickly over the next year and make part of this just snap together, at least hopefully by next year. Beyond that, there's a bunch of other future work that has come up as we've worked through this, and I'll mention some of these things now. Yannick also has a PR out for review in supply chain to do overrides. Overrides, Tony touched on this before. In almost all of our cases, at all of the companies where we've implemented this kind of tooling internally, we need to be able to override whatever the external package manager is telling us with some locally determined additional. We're either changing what they told us because we've done a deeper analysis and have a different reading on what they've declared, or we're adding internal metadata to package information. And so this is a key feature that makes this tooling usable in all of our different commercial requirements. So that's an important area of work. Another thing that we have had for some of these tools in the workspace world is what we call a workspace bomb, which is basically at the end of the workspace, we can look at all of the HTTP archive rules and get a sense of the total inputs. And this is something that's no longer as accessible in the BZL mod world. So we've kind of played with a couple of different solutions here. This might actually require a change to core Bazel to get what we want in the end. This is an area of active research. If you're interested in this, please let us know or have ideas. Another thing is that many external package managers now attest to their packages. So they have a signed attestation that says, this was built on known infrastructure, it matches these sources. We haven't currently prototyped how we would pull that through to an SBOM. That seems important to us. Currently, with Bazel aspects don't traverse into resolved tool chains for rules. This is an area that we think we need to be able to do eventually to be able to introspect on the tool chains that run in that a rule uses, and in order to augment the information that we gather for SBOMs. As Tony mentioned, we have our first guinea pig project is Selenium. It has a lot of nice properties. It doesn't have much C++ or any C++ in it. And so I think we need a C++ example. One thing that we've batted around is Envoy, because it does already produce its own SBOM with its own tooling. Be interesting to go in there if there are any Envoy maintainers that are excited about that, or if you have another maybe smaller project that you'd be interested in working on, that would be a great contribution. We started with licensing, but in Bazel Contrib supply chain, we haven't really gotten back to licensing. So we have to complete that. We have to generate copyright notices. We have to apply licensing policies like this artifact may not statically link with LGPL, for example. I think it would be great to work on creating an SBOM for Bazel itself with this tooling. So that's something that is out there as a goal. If you're interested in starting to chip away at that, that would help us understand the problem space. It would be a great test case. And I think something that someone new to Bazel would expect to be there as an example, maybe the first place they would look for a complicated one. Obviously, there's documentation to improve or to write because it doesn't exist at all, and we could use more example code. So this is our concluding slide, and it has a couple of reminders of calls to action and ways that you can get involved. I've talked a lot about rules authors and what you can do. If you have internal tooling for SBOMs, I actually think I actually think now is the time where you can start to add package metadata alongside rules license if that's what you've been using. Or if you've been using something else, you can start to add package metadata and start to incorporate that into your tooling if you have internal tooling for this. Obviously, pick up some of the future work items is something you can do. In the Bazel Slack, there's a supply chain security channel. We encourage you to join that. This afternoon at 2:45 in Cottonwood B, we have a Birds of a Feather session to discuss all of this work. In the supply chain security Slack, in that channel, there's a Google Doc where you can add agenda items for the Birds of a Feather if you'd like. A couple of us, at least me, will be at Aspects Hackathon tomorrow morning. Please come if you have something you want to work on. We have, as Tony said, had weekly meetings. We'll post details of those. They're currently 8:30 in the morning, Eastern US time. The timing and frequency has changed every once in a while. Yes. So actually, Tony and I have been having these kinds of calls once a month for many, many years now, off and on. So we'll keep that series going.
All right.
And with that, we can switch to questions.
Any?